Good morning. The sun is not yet up. And as you can see, I'm at a place that is kind of unusual for a morning. If you look in the background, you can see that I'm surrounded by graves. I'm surrounded by monuments. I'm surrounded by all sorts of things that indicate that I'm in the place of the dead. But I know that I'm not going to find somebody here. His name is Jesus. And as I'm here this morning, anticipating that very soon the sun will be rising right over there, I want to talk to you about a story that we find in Matthew chapter 28, Mark chapter 16, Luke chapter 24, and John chapter 20. It's a story that most of you are very, very familiar with, and I'm not going to read those passages this morning. I'd like you to take the time to do that. You can also read 1 Corinthians chapter 15 because that talks about all those who saw Jesus after the resurrection. And you can read about another man who had the opportunity to see Jesus after the resurrection in Acts chapter 9. His name was Saul. Well, what I'd like to talk to you about this morning is a little bit of that story. And as you read the account, I like the way it starts, because the very first thing that is said in the account is, now the Sabbath had ended. If you look through Scripture, you see that the Sabbath is the day that God rested. In 6 days, God created the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day, he rested. And I find it kind of interesting that after Jesus' work here on earth, one of the things he said on the cross was, "It is finished." He had done the work of his Father. He had done the job. And then, after the Passover, just before the Sabbath, he was crucified. And as you read the account of his burial, they wanted to make sure to get him buried before the Sabbath. So he was taken to the cemetery, he was taken to the garden, and he was placed in the tomb. Now, we don't have the type of tombs here that they have in Israel, but he was taken and he was placed there, and there was a stone rolled in front of it. And Jesus had a Sabbath rest. Now it says on the third day he was raised. The first day would have been that little bit of daylight before the Sabbath started. Then the second day would have been the Sabbath. And then as soon as it started to get light, and like you can see, even though the sun is not yet up, it's getting real close to sunlight right now. And this would be called the third day, because this was the day after the Sabbath, the first day of the week, which is why we meet on Sunday to celebrate Jesus and all that he does for us. But when Jesus was gone from the grave, nobody knew it yet, but there were some women who went to do some work of preparing his body for the official burial, because they'd been in a hurry the day before Sabbath, the day of the crucifixion on Good Friday, and they took spices because they were going to prepare his body, and they were going to place the proper wraps and everything on Jesus. Those were things they could not do on the Sabbath because they were not allowed to do that kind of work. It involved carrying weight. It involved carrying some different materials. They could not do that on the Sabbath. So as a result, they were going on the first day of the week. When they were doing that, You can read about it. There were angels that appeared. And there was young men, and they were described in the different ways. And Jesus actually appeared to Mary Magdalene. But in particular, the ones that appeared to them said, "Who are you looking for?" They said, "We're looking for Jesus." And I love the comment that was there. "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" Which was pretty confusing to them, I'm very sure. But what it made me think about is how we quite often actually look with dead eyes. Now, what do I mean by dead eyes? Well, dead eyes can be all sorts of things. We try to understand God, we try to understand Jesus through our experience. And yes, it's important for us to be able to share what our experience is. But the reality is, Jesus goes way beyond our experience. And so, if we just see Jesus through our experience, we have dead eyes. If we just see Jesus through our intellect, because you see, there are some people who say, well, we know that Jesus could not have been raised from the dead because scientifically, or for whatever reason, our intellect says that it couldn't have happened. Those are dead eyes. We also can have the eyes of culture, and we can look at Jesus and everything that was involved with Jesus through the way that our culture sees things. Once again, dead eyes. And there's yet one more dead eye situation, and that's this. I really wish all sorts of things were true about Jesus. You know, I wish that everybody who was a nice person would get to go to heaven. I wish that everybody would go to heaven. But it's not my wish that matters. It's what Jesus has taught us. It's what Jesus and God, his Father, decided. So rather than looking with dead eyes, let's look for the question, why search for the living among the dead? Now, Jesus is living. He's not in here. We can open up every one of these graves and we're not going to find Jesus. We could go to Jerusalem and we could look into every one of the graves and we would not find Jesus. We could go anywhere in the world and we could look in the graves and we would not find any sign of Jesus whatsoever. And actually, we don't know exactly where Jesus was buried because Jesus knew that if we knew an exact spot, what would happen is we would begin to treat that spot as sacred. But it's not about the spot, it's about the one who's no longer there. And when Jesus was raised from the dead, he didn't just leave it open for speculation. And this is where it's important for you to read the rest of those passages, because what took place is Jesus appeared physically. He not only appeared, he ate with them. Now, he did some freaky things. He went through walls and appeared with the disciples and things. But on that morning that he was raised, he appeared to Mary, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, to Joanna. The accounts tell different things. And of course, there are some people that make a big deal about that, back with those intellectual eyes. They go, oh, the stories don't all add up. Actually, they do. Because you see, if I were to tell you a story about something Jody and I had done, I would include certain details and certain people. She would include other people and other details. And somebody else who might have been along on the same experience, the same trip or whatever, they would remember and share different details. So it's not a matter of disagreement. It's a matter of just different perspectives and different people telling it. So Jesus appeared to several different women that morning, but when they went back to report to the disciples who were gathered together early in that morning, Peter and John said, we need to go look. And I like this part of the story because you see, John apparently was a faster runner because he ran and he got to the tomb ahead of Peter. He got to the tomb ahead of Peter. But John was more shy, so he did not look in. Well, he did not go in. He looked in, but he did not go in. And then it says that Peter caught up and he pushed right past and he went into the tomb. And they saw the clothes lying there, and there are people that give all sorts of significance to how the clothes were laying there, whether the way they were folded, all those types of things. And there are details that are given. You can read about those. There probably was significance because God took care of all sorts of incredible details in every part of Jesus' life. But the key thing was, Jesus was gone. Jesus appeared to them. And then they went back and told the others. Jesus did not appear to them. What happened is Jesus was not there. Jesus appeared then on the road to Emmaus, and you can read about that account. How Jesus appeared to a couple of the disciples on the road to Emmaus and talked with them and broke bread with them. Then he appeared to the 11 disciples. Of course, Judas was not there. He had killed himself because of his heartbreak and shame about betraying Jesus. But first of all, of course, he appeared to the 10 because Thomas wasn't there. And you can read the story about that Thomas said, well, I'm not going to believe it unless I actually put my finger in the holes and put my hand in his side. And so Jesus appeared once again to them, this time with Thomas present. Later on, the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul writes, and it says that Jesus appeared to more than 500 at one time. And he appeared in a special way, it appears, to his brother James. And not just to James, but also to Saul on the road to Damascus. Saul, later called Paul. Why is this so significant? You see, there are all sorts of religions that claim that their hero, their God, was raised from the dead. The difference is, Jesus wasn't just raised from the dead. And we know that it's not just a claim, because Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 15 that Jesus appeared to more than 500 at one time. The proof of his being there and present for so many people eliminates that intellectual argument of saying, well, the disciples just hallucinated or they had this story they concocted. No, Jesus appeared in the flesh to hundreds of people. Because God knew that there would come a time when people would deny and people would say, oh, that couldn't possibly have happened. Scripture records it. And because of what they found in the grave that morning and what they found in that grave from then on, they found this truth. He has risen. He is risen. Jesus is risen from the dead. The Apostle Paul also said something else that I think is significant for us, especially for those who go, well, the resurrection, I believe in Jesus and all those nice things he said, but we don't really need that whole resurrection thing. I like what the Apostle Paul said. He said, if there is no resurrection, then of all people we are to be the most pitied, because we give everything. We sacrifice everything. And if the resurrection's a lie, we're fools. I may be a fool, but in this I am not. He is risen. He is risen. Jesus is risen from the dead, and someday, like the sun that is trying to rise right now, Christ is going to return. And if we were able to look in these graves, we would see that every one of these graves has their feet facing the direction that I'm walking and that you are looking right now. Every one of these graves has their feet facing east. And why is that? Because when Christ returns, it says he's going to return. Jerusalem, he is going to return in the east, and we want to be facing the right way. So even when bodies are buried in a Christian cemetery, we are facing east so that we are looking the right way when Christ returns, and he will return. Right now, there are clouds. Otherwise, we'd see the sunrise. Right now, our world is a bit cloudy. But someday soon, Jesus will return. And until then, he is risen. Yes, he is risen indeed.